Appaloosa is an underrated old-school western full of great performances and a big commitment to authenticity. So let's take a look behind the scenes of the movie with 20 things you didn't know about Appaloosa, such as how the film almost looked very different, how Deadwood helped save it from cancellation, and the story behind the scrapped sequel. So Appaloosa was actually based on a best-selling novel of the same name by Robert B. Parker, which closely mirrors the plot of the film, following Virgil Cole and Everett Hitch in their efforts to save a long-suffering town from a renegade rancher. So being a fan of westerns, Ed Harris decided to pick up a copy of the book to read while on a horse-riding holiday in Ireland. And upon reading the first few chapters, Harris fell in love with the story, especially the camaraderie between Virgil and Everett, and the way in which the novel is constructed like a classic western, yet features themes still relevant to contemporary society. So he decided to purchase the rights to the novel, and even managed to convince its author to adapt the book into a screenplay, to ensure that it translated well from page to screen. Now, although Ed Harris is best known as an actor, he has also tried his hand at directing, with his first attempt being the award-winning 2000 film Pollock, a biopic about the famous painter of the same name. So, Appaloosa was the second film that Ed Harris ever directed, as well as his very first western. But from the start, he had a really clear idea of where it would fit within the genre, because Harris apparently wanted to steer clear of the popular revisionist approach of the time and instead make an old-fashioned western, as tribute to films such as 3:10 to Yuma, My Darling Clementine, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So in order for Appaloosa to be a success, it was really important that it nailed its casting, especially when it came to the characters of Virgil and Everett. And for that reason, Ed Harris opted to play Virgil himself, and quickly made up his mind that he wanted Viggo Mortensen for the role of Everett. The reason for this was because the two actors had already worked together a few years prior on the 2005 movie A History of Violence. And while publicising the film at the Toronto International Film Festival, Harris apparently handed Mortensen a copy of Appaloosa, asking his co-star to read it and consider playing the part of Everett. Now, in hindsight, Harris admitted that he probably could have been more tactful in his approach, saying, "It's a totally awkward proposition, handing another actor a book like that, but I enjoyed working with Viggo in A History of Violence, and I thought he'd respond to the material." And luckily he did, as Mortensen really connected with the novel, in particular its characters and the way in which it approached the genre, saying, "I like westerns, but there are a lot of bad ones. What sets this one apart is just how the characters are a little more guarded." Another reason that Harris was so keen on adapting Appaloosa was to bring the unique, understated camaraderie between Virgil and Everett to the big screen, with Harris saying, though they've been hanging out for years, they're not too intimate, but they know each other. Aside from in sports or being a cop, I can't think of any other situation where a friendship like that is called for. So in every scene between the pair, Harris really made an effort to convey the unspoken respect and sense of humour that these two characters share.
Well, we ain't doing nothing wrong and you ain't got no jurisdiction up here.
Jurisdiction?
I believe he means jurisdiction.
I believe he does, and he's by God right about it.
The second big reason why Appaloosa appealed so much to Ed Harris and Viggo Mortensen was because of their love for westerns, with both actors making quite a name for themselves within the genre. For instance, Harris has appeared in projects such as Walker, Sweetwater, and more recently Westworld as the Man in Black. Meanwhile, Viggo has already appeared in the likes of Young Guns 2 and Hidalgo, before going on to direct and star in his own western movie The Dead Don't Hurt. Now, considering the classic westerns that Ed Harris was hoping to pay tribute to with Appaloosa, it was very important to him that he secure a cinematographer that could bring that vision to life in the modern day. And the person who he thought would be perfect for the job was Dean Semler, who had already shot multiple westerns such as Young Guns, City Slickers, and Dances with Wolves, as well as many panoramic epics like Waterworld and Mad Max 2. But the only problem was that Semler was in high demand, and Appaloosa didn't exactly have the biggest budget. However, upon reading the script, the cinematographer fell in love with the story and agreed to shoot the movie, doing so in widescreen on film with lots of static, straightforward camera work to emulate the style of iconic westerns from the past. So despite all of the passion that Ed Harris had for the movie and all of the talent that he'd assembled in front of and behind the camera, the actor turned director was only able to gather together a $20 million budget for Appaloosa. Now, although he considered this technically sufficient, it was still very tight, meaning that the film had to be shot pretty fast, with lots of the cast and crew being paid little to nothing. However, apparently everybody working on Appaloosa banded together out of love for the project and their loyalty to Ed Harris. So even though Harris put everything into getting Appaloosa made, even he admitted that it was risky for him to be directing a western at the time, saying, "You can count on one hand, or maybe half a hand, the number of westerns that were box office successes in the recent past." And apparently for this reason, New Line Cinema became nervous that the movie would struggle at the box office, especially with it releasing alongside blockbusters such as The Dark Knight and Iron Man. And so, production on Appaloosa slowed down as confidence in the project faded, until all of a sudden the success of 3:10 to Yuma and Deadwood proved that there was still an audience for westerns, apparently saving Appaloosa from being shelved. So because of this unexpected delay during pre-production, it caused Appaloosa quite a few issues behind the scenes in regards to scheduling, especially for its actors. Because initially, Diane Lane had been cast as Alison French, but ultimately left the project because of the delays. And so, Renee Zellweger was signed to replace her, who was very keen to work with Ed Harris and to tackle such a mysterious, ambiguous character like Alison. Another casualty of the production delay was Viggo Mortensen, who, coming off his unforgettable appearances in Lord of the Rings and Eastern Promises, was already looking forward to roles in The Road and A Dangerous Method. And for this reason, the actor couldn't really afford to wait around for Appaloosa, and reportedly asked Ed Harris to try and find an actor to replace him. So Harris reluctantly interviewed 20 other actors for the part, but in every case they were either not right for the role or declined to be involved, leaving both Harris and Mortensen in a really awkward position. However, following this, Harris said, "2 days before we started principal photography, Viggo shows up in New Mexico. He's ready to go. He's done research on the period. He's given really great thought to his character. He had detailed ideas about his wardrobe and his props. He was in excellent shape and good spirits, and he subsequently played Everett Hitch to perfection. Viggo Mortensen is a man of his word." So another reason why Viggo seemed destined to play Everett Hitch was because the character of Katie, played by Ariadne Gil, actually ended up becoming his real-life romantic partner. Because having previously co-starred in the 2006 Spanish war movie Alatriste, the pair officially revealed that they were dating a year after the release of Appaloosa in 2009, and are still a couple to this day, residing together in Spain. So once Appaloosa was finally given the green light to start filming, the movie was shot in just 2 months in Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico. And for some of the scenes, Ed Harris decided to film on the famous Bonanza Creek movie ranch in Santa Fe, which has previously featured in just about every western you could think of, including Young Guns, 3:10 to Yuma, and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. So Appaloosa is actually a fictional town that in theory is located somewhere southwest of New Mexico. And because of how important the location is to the story, Ed Harris put a lot of thought into its creation, envisioning it as a town formed in the 1800s around the presence of a mining company, with settlers from all over the world coming to Appaloosa to work, bringing bits and pieces from their culture along with them, which you can actually see hints of throughout the movie. They even went as far as to create backstories for all of the residents and businesses in the town. In fact, the attention to detail was so high that they even installed period glass in the windows, resulting in an unusual distortion effect that most viewers wouldn't even notice. So clearly, authenticity was really important to Ed Harris in the movie, leading him to do lots of research into the period so as to ensure that everything was as accurate to 1882 as possible, including the saddles, weapons, and even the fully functioning steam train. As such, much of the costumes shown on screen were based on authentic antique clothing and were made from scratch, before being meticulously beaten and worn down to make them look lived in. Now, as far as props go, probably the most famous in Appaloosa is the 50-inch shotgun that Everett carries around with him throughout the movie. And in real life, the weapon was commonly known as a punt gun or a market gun, which were commonly mounted on boats to shoot at flocks of geese and ducks to supply restaurants. And for that reason, the weapon is no longer readily available, and the ones that do exist are antiques. So Ed Harris had a replica built that looks like an 8-gauge despite being built on a 12-gauge foundation that shoots 12-gauge blanks. Now, if you were wondering why Everett opts to use such an unpractical gun in his role as a lawman, Viggo Mortensen actually explained it really well, saying,
"It's not the most practical weapon, but what it does have, just like these above average sized horses that we ride into town on, there's a psychological weight to it, impact, you know. So you see that gun being fired, you hear that gun being fired early in the movie, and after that you really don't even need to see it being shot again. Just the fact that I'm walking around with it, you know, I might use it, that's enough."
Another aspect of Appaloosa that was given a lot of consideration was the appearances of the characters and how they styled their hair. For instance, the idea for Everett's goatee and moustache came from Viggo Mortensen himself, who based it on photos from the time period, while opting to cut his hair short to reflect the character's military training. And as for Virgil, Ed Harris actually wanted the character to have hair, and had a wig made for screen tests, but in the end, it just didn't look right. So there are actually a couple of cool cameos in Appaloosa that most people would probably never notice. For instance, Judge Callison is played by Bob L. Harris, who is actually the real-life father of Ed Harris. And the character of Muller is played by Daniel Parker, the real-life son of author Robert B. Parker, who wrote the Appaloosa novel. Another thing that's easily missed in Appaloosa is the meaning of the song that Allie plays on the piano towards the end of the movie, because the song that she's playing is actually an instrumental version of the traditional cowboy song Goodbye Old Paint, all about a rider bidding farewell to his faithful horse before setting out on a new journey, conveying a sense of nostalgia and fondness on the topic of parting ways with a loyal companion. So upon understanding this context, it's very likely that the use of this song is meant to be subtle foreshadowing of Everett parting ways with Virgil at the end of the film. So 15 years on from its release, Appaloosa is still a western that divides opinion, both with fans and critics. Because when it premiered in 2008 at the Toronto International Film Festival, it actually received a pretty lukewarm reception, with many having issues with its pacing and the performance of Renee Zellweger. However, not all of the reviews were negative, with the New Yorker calling it a well-made, satisfying traditionalist western with some odd quirks and turns. And so, as it stands, on Rotten Tomatoes, Appaloosa currently has a critic score of 76%, but surprisingly has an audience score of just 55%. But either way, in the end, Appaloosa was deemed to be a modest box office success, making $27.7 million on a $20 million budget. Now, although Appaloosa very much felt like a standalone story, the novel it's based on was actually the first book of a 4-part series, all centered around the adventures of Virgil Cole and Everett Hitch. So given the success of Appaloosa and how much of a fan Ed Harris was of the books that inspired it, Harris apparently had plans to adapt the second and third books in the series into a single movie, to act as a sequel to Appaloosa, featuring the same cast and characters. And the plot would have apparently focused on Allie running off with another man, prompting Virgil to team up with Everett again to try and find Allie in Texas. Now, the only problem with this sequel was that for it to succeed, it would almost certainly need to reunite Ed and Viggo, given that their on-screen chemistry was the big draw of the first movie. But, Harris explained, I had thought about wanting to do a sequel to Appaloosa, but Viggo wasn't really up to playing Hitch again, and it kind of felt like we were meant to do those films together. So I kind of put that on the back burner. And so Appaloosa 2 never came to be, with the novels now being the only way to find out what happened next in the story. But let me know below, would you have liked to have seen a sequel, and what did you think of Appaloosa as a movie? Also, if you enjoyed this video, you might also want to check out this one right here.